Namaste nerds, this is Navinad, the Budget Pub Stumper, and today we're going to be getting back to kind of the roots of the channel. If you've been paying attention the last couple of weeks, we've done some interesting different things. Last week we did an interview and wrapped up the Brewers competition the week before, and I gave you the results last weekend, and this is not that. But just stay tuned because we are going to be doing individual deck techs and kind of interviews with the brewers, not interviewers with the brews. That would be crazy. But today we're just going to do a $100, a sub $100, $98.76 to be exact, deck tech on an oldie but goldie Brago King Eternal. Now, before I talk about what the commander does and then work into the win lines, I want to talk about what kind of brought this thing back into my radar for budget. There was a couple of things. One, I started thinking about building Plagon. Is that the thing's name? Oh, where did he go? There he is. Plagon, Lord of the Beach. And then I started thinking a little bit more about it, and I thought, you know what would be better? I think Plagon would make a pretty good member of the 99 for Brago, and so I decided to do that. Now, I had revisited this deck, not on the channel, but just in general, not long before that, well, a little while back when this little guy came out. Invasion of Arcavios, Invasion of A. When Invasion of A came out, I thought, you know, that would be really good in Brago, and I really thought that I was onto something special and was the only one that got to it and figured it out. But as per always, or at least usual, you're never the only one to figure stuff out, and I've seen other people doing this since. So this was one of the things that I thought would make a great addition to the Brago deck. And then this most recently I thought would just really be something, I'd say something special for the deck. I think it's the best version of this effect. So let's talk about these cards. I'm going to read them to you, then we're going to go to the main win line. After discussing what Brago actually does. So, Plagon, Lord of the Beach. Now, this isn't that big of a deal on the deck. It's an upgrade. When Plagon, Lord of the Beach enters, draw a card for each creature you control with toughness greater than its power, which includes itself and Brago. So if you have Brago in play, you'll definitely draw at least 2 cards every time this ETBs. Then you've got plenty of other creatures in the mix that like Wall of Omens, Peregrine Drake. There's other guys that will help it to trigger for more. Other guys, there's one. So yeah, we've got some that will make it trigger for more than just 1 or 2 draws per ETB. Now, what was so special and exciting about Invasion of A? So Invasion of Arcavios says that when it enters the battlefield, you can search your deck, graveyard, or anything outside the game. So you can look through your deck or find the thing in exile or search for it and find it in your graveyard. You can basically search anywhere, any like legal zone. To find an instant or a sorcery spell, and then you put that back in your hand, and that happens on ETB. So we're going to be able to trigger this again and again with Brago, and so the big kind of cool thing to do with it is temporal manipulation, which just got a reprint. So I was actually able to get this guy in. Now this is an extra turn spell. It's just the kind of typical rate. But it's got one important little detail that's better than a lot of other versions of this effect, is that it doesn't exile itself. So you can just 5 mana, take an extra turn after this one, period. It goes into your graveyard where you can recur it with Invasion of A. So if you've got your Brago online with the Invasion and you've got enough mana, you can just take the rest of the turns and just win the game that way. The Walk the Aeons does the same thing. The advantage of Walk the Aeons, honestly, is that it's $1.57. It's only 6 mana. It's not the worst rate. And it's got the sacrifice 3 islands to buy it back clause, which could come up. We've got a lot of islands. But mainly this is just another one that doesn't exile itself. Now that doesn't matter for the battle. this would find it from exile anyway. And keep that in mind if you're building your own deck. But I also wanted to use Archaeomancer. So I have kind of two versions of this combo. Okay, so let's talk about Brago, and then I'll explain this combo. And then we'll get to the combo that made Brago competitively, well, somewhat competitively viable, and certainly budget competitively viable. A lot of tongue twisters today. Okay, so Brago, King Eternal, what does he do? Whenever you hit somebody, you can flicker any number of permanents, non-land permanents that you control. So you hit somebody, you can flicker all your things, they come back into play, and if you're flickering rocks, and this is important, if you're flickering mana rocks, just as a general rule in Magic the Gathering, if a permanent comes into play, it comes into play untapped unless it states otherwise on the card somewhere. That's why when you play your lands, they come in untapped. So if you have Brago and a Soul Ring in play, and you hit somebody with Brago, you could tap 2 mana, and then float that 2 mana, and then flicker the Soul Ring. It would come into play untapped, and then you could use that 2 mana again. And that kind of thing does come up for value, but it's also important for some of the combo lines. But let's just finish what we started here. So let's just say we're late game, which we're playing a ton of hate pieces and removal pieces and interaction. We shouldn't have any trouble, card draw. We shouldn't have any trouble getting to the late game with this deck. That's what it's good at. So let's say we get to turn 7 and we've got, 8 mana counting our rocks and all. We have cast our Invasion of A to find our Temporal Manipulation. Now, if we have enough mana, we can go ahead and do it straight away. But most of the time, you won't be able to do both of these on the same turn. But when you get to your next turn, you will attack with Brago. You will flicker the Invasion. Let's start that again. You will cast your Temporal Manipulation, which means you're going to take an extra turn after this one. Then you're going to attack with Brago, and then you're going to flicker the Invasion, which is going to return Temporal Manipulation from your graveyard back to your hand. So then you'll go to your next turn. You'll hit somebody with Brago. You'll cast the Time Warp. You'll hit somebody with Brago, recur it. So basically, if you can get to a state where you've got this in play, and well, really, I guess you could just say most of the time the turn after you cast Invasion, that's the end of the game. You will win the game on that turn. So 2 ways to do that: Walk the Eons and Temporal Manipulation. Temporal Manipulation can be got from graveyard, and it can also be tutored up out of your deck with Invasion. That's why it's better than, say, this guy. But the other way is Archaeomancer. And for the Archaeomancer to work, where you're going to flicker the Archaeomancer, returning the Time Warp to your hand. When I say Time Warp, I just mean that generically. When you return one of your Time Walk-like effects to your hand, it needs to have not been exiled. And most of the Time Warp type spells that exist in the game will exile themselves. So something to keep in mind if you're building a version of the deck is to use Archaeomancer as part of this combo. You need to use Time Warps that don't exile themselves. And another thing to keep in mind is Invasion of Arcavios, this thing, doesn't care if the thing is exiled or not. So if you're only going to use the Invasion, you can use the ones that exile themselves. But if you're going to try to combo with Archaeomancer and Invasion, then you need to use ones that will stay in the game, at least for Archaeomancer. Okay, so what's next? So we want to talk about how we get a ton of value. Well, no. Let's stick with my normal thing. My usual routine is we start with the win conditions and work our way back. Now, the main win condition, the thing that kind of makes the deck do what it does, kind of makes it, the thing that I think put it on the map for a high-powered deck, is its interaction with Strionic Resonator, which I just think is also a super cool card. Strionic Resonator says, 2 colorless and tap. It costs 2 mana to get this out. Pay 2 and tap to copy target triggered ability you control, and then you can choose new targets if you want. So what's the main thing that we're going to be targeting to copy? The triggered ability we're going to be copying. It's going to be Brago's triggered ability. This is a triggered ability because it happens when he hits somebody. So if you hit somebody with Brago, you're going to put the Brago ability on the stack. Now let's just say you've got let's say you have a Soul Ring out. You have Soul Ring and you have the Strionic Resonator and you've got Brago. With just those pieces, you can tap the Soul Ring to activate the Strionic Resonator to copy the triggered ability that Brago puts on the stack when he hits somebody. So you're going to use that flicker however many permanents. You're going to use that to flicker the Strionic Resonator and the Soul Ring. And remember, we already said when things enter the battlefield, they enter untapped unless it states otherwise on the card. So you'll be in an infinite loop as long as you have the ability to produce 2 mana from non-lands. From something that you flicker. And you've got Strionic Resonator and Brago with an open lane. And the dude flies, so usually you'll have an open lane. And you've got lots of removal too. So if you have any other piece that you can get value from, like let's just say you've got, this guy. You've got Aether Channeler in play, and you've got the Strionic Resonator and a Soul Ring. You attack with Brago, and you get the triggered ability of flickering all your things, or as many things as you want, and you choose to flicker the Aether Channeler, the Strionic Resonator, and the Soul Ring. And so those will all come into the battlefield again, untapped, and so you will get one of the abilities off of Aether Channeler. So this thing will either create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying, return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or draw a card. And so with this kind of minimal setup, you're going to be able to draw as many cards as you want. Now, if you add anything else that can produce mana at all to the mix, any of your rocks or Cloud of Fairies or Peregrine Drake, if you add any of these to the mix, then let's just take as an example, we've got Cloud of Fairies, we've got Aether Channeler, and we've got Strionic Resonator with our Soul Ring. We attack with Brago. We're going to tap the Soul Ring and the Strionic Resonator to copy the activated or the triggered ability that's on the stack. And then we're going to flicker the Aether Channeler, the Cloud of Fairies, the Strionic Resonator, and the Soul Ring. So you're going to get to draw a card, and then when Cloud of Fairies comes back into play, you're going to get to untap 2 lands. And so now you're going to draw the card, you're going to untap the lands, you're going to tap the 2 lands to add 2 mana to your mana pool and just go again. And so here you're going to draw as many cards as you want. I guess also you could say you can draw as many cards as you want, put as many flying birds as you want into play, return all of your opponent's non-land permanents to their hands. So you're basically going to go off. Now, one of the difficulties of actually converting that into a win historically has been that this all happens during your combat step. And so whatever mana, you can go infinite mana with Cloud of Fairies or Drake, or just having 3 mana worth of mana rocks in play, like just a simple, just a simple Basalt Monolith. If you have Basalt Monolith and you've got Strionic Resonator with Brago, congratulations, you made infinite mana. But as soon as you pass into your second main phase, as soon as you leave combat, your infinite floating mana goes away. So that's kind of a problem. That's a tricky thing to try to overcome. But there's a couple of ways I've thought of to overcome that ability. There was a guy I tried out in here that's 3 mana, ETB, make a treasure, and that would allow you to make infinite treasures, so then you go to your next main phase and you've got infinite mana still. So if you draw your deck and you've got infinite treasures, then you'll win pretty easily that way. But the card's just kind of bad. It's just kind of a bad card on its own. Even though it has synergy with a lot of what this deck is doing, I elected to just put in a card with a much higher floor, and it's just a good card. Born Upon a Wind. So this is the answer. You're in a situation where you can draw your deck and make infinite mana, but you've got to do all that during your combat step. Well, you can only cast instants in your combat step, usually. But if you've got this Born Upon the Wind somewhere in your 99, since you're drawing as many cards as you want, you will draw it. And when you draw it with infinite mana, you cast it. It says that you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash, and you get to draw a card off of it. And so you can just draw your deck, cast Born Upon a Wind, and then use whatever win condition, set up whatever win condition you'd like from there. Make 1 billion birds with this thing, and you've got 1 billion mana, and you've drawn one of your Time Warp effects. You'll cast it, you'll go to your extra turn, and you'll bash everybody to death with your 1 billion birds, your bird army. So I would say that is the main win condition. Although this or this with the Time Walk is not at all hard to set up. But they do, each of them require their own kind of setup. But the other, so there's I guess 2 main win lines. There's Invasion and with some kind of a Time Walk effect, and then there's Strionic Resonator with whatever, almost anything in the deck. Any of these things with Strionic Resonator is going to do a lot of damage or create insurmountable value for you. So those are the 2 main win cons, and we've got a backup to this win con in the form of Archaeomancer. And we've got a backup to Strionic Resonator in the form of Lithoform Engine. So this one is a 4 mana artifact, so it's not quite as good in that regard, but it has the same ability where you can tap 2 and tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control, and you can choose new targets for the copy. So this will do exactly the same thing that Strionic Resonator will do for you in the deck. This combos with Brago the same exact way. Also, you can do, you can make copies of other things here. For 3 mana, you can copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. That can be really useful. For 4 mana, you can copy target permanent spell you control. Now, keep in mind that's only while it's on the stack, so you have to be casting the permanent. Otherwise, it's not a permanent spell, it's just a permanent. So you can copy a permanent spell, not the permanent itself, but it just makes a copy of whatever you'd like to make a copy of. So it's a very good card. It's got plenty of utility in the deck. But it also just happens to win the game if we assemble the right board state, which is not at all hard to assemble in the deck. Like I said, it's a control deck. We've got lots and lots of interaction, ways to take the game into the longer, later stages of the game. Lots of removal. And I want to talk about, and a pretty good suite of mana rocks too, because it is important that if we set up our combo line with Lithoform Engine or Strionic Resonator, we have to be able to make 2 mana to keep the loop going. And I mean 2 mana that can't just be lands. I guess it can be lands in that you can use Cloud of Fairies or Peregrine Drake to untap the lands. So in that respect, it can be lands. But you need some way to produce mana other than lands, put it that way. So if you can produce 3 mana, you can make infinite mana. And if you can draw a single card, like with any of the effects that you run that draw cards, like Aether Channeler, Lauren doesn't quite, because, I guess Lauren's a nice piece in the deck, and I do think the card draw ability is underutilized, underappreciated, slept on a little bit. We might talk about that later. But she'll come back in with Summoning Sickness, so you can't just keep drawing cards. But Watcher for tomorrow essentially will draw a card. If you've got your Welcoming Vampire, it says whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield, you're going to draw a card. If you've got Plagon, that's going to draw usually a bunch of cards. Wall of Omens. So any way to draw any number of cards during your combat step, plus at least 2 mana that you can flicker with Strionic Resonator, and you can draw your deck. If you make that 3 mana instead, even if it's colorless, even if you just have Basalt Monolith, Strionic Resonator, and we'll say Plagon in play. If that's your entire board state outside of course, Brago, then you can go infinite colorless mana, and you can draw your deck, and then all you need to do is find a way to produce 1 blue mana. So you have like 1 blue, say an island untapped. You can use your infinite colorless in 1 to cast your Born Upon a Wind. And that means that all of the mana rocks that you drew, like Arcane Signet, Azorius Signet, whatever, you can now start deploying your mana rocks that make colored mana, and then you can actually go for the kill. There's other ways to draw cards in the enchantments also. Candlekeep Sage, whenever a commander you control enters or leaves the battlefield, you're going to draw a card. This produces a lot of value even before you're set up for the combo, because you can actually flicker Brago with his own ability. So let's say you've got Candlekeep Sage in play, and you haven't got the combo set up, but you just attack somebody with Brago. You will flicker your Brago, and when it leaves play, you'll draw a card. And when it comes back into play, you'll draw another card. So Candlekeep Sage will draw 2 cards per turn with your commander. Dovin's Acuity, you're going to draw life, or gain life and draw a card. And if you want, you can return this to your hand when you cast an instant. Sometimes you'll do that just to get an extra little bit of value before you get set up. One of the sickest things you can do in the deck is you can keep a Mystic Remora indefinitely. So normally, Mystic Remora is a super busted, powerful card. In cEdh, my vote for the best card, period. It's a very powerful effect, but the thing that gets you is that cumulative upkeep eventually becomes too much for you to contend with, and you have to let it die. Now, most of the time, that's after it's drawn 5 or 6 cards, and you're happy to, you're fine with it. But in this deck, we're going to flicker the Mystic Remora in and out every single turn, and so you're never going to have to worry about that cumulative upkeep. It's just going to get to 1 and that's it. You can just keep this around for the entire game as long as you've got Brago in play. And even if you don't have Brago in play, as long as you can keep the upkeep going long enough to get your Brago in play and go, I should say as long as you can keep it in play long enough for Summoning Sickness to wear off of Brago, then you can keep it in play indefinitely. Omen of the Seas is just another way to draw cards. It's got a little bit of extra value outside of that, but it's mainly there for flickering every turn for incremental value with Brago, and then being one of your combo pieces or a setup piece that goes along with your combo to help you draw your deck. Reality Acid. This is absolutely nasty. Okay, so this one we should talk about. Excuse me, just taking a sip of my my new beverage of choice. You've probably heard me talk about it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is really, really good tea. This is chai tea. Anyway, moving on. Reality Acid. It has Vanishing 3. It enchants a permanent. So you're taking a counter off, or maybe you're adding a counter, but after 3 turns, it leaves play, and the permanent that was enchanted by it gets sacrificed. But if you flicker it with Brago, it also leaves play. And so with this little guy, you can just make your opponent sacrifice a permanent that you want them to sacrifice every single turn. And that's without going off with one of the combos. If you go infinite with Reality Acid, you get to destroy all of their things. And this doesn't say enchant target non-land permanent, by the way. You will murder every single thing that they have in play with Reality Acid. This gets rid of everything. I've got some other pieces that might be worth mentioning. So, you might notice one of the things I didn't include. I'm not putting a bunch of flicker spells in the deck. I mean, yeah, we've got a lot of good targets for flickering, but that's what our commander does, right? And does a good job of it. So you don't really want to waste a bunch of slots on kind of second-rate flicker spells. So I opted to go with exactly Ephemerate, which is like the best one. It's got serious competition. Ephemerate, because you're going to get it's got a lot of utility in the deck. It can act as sort of a counter spell if somebody tries to remove one of your pieces and you'd rather it didn't get removed. You can Ephemerate that thing, kind of blanking the removal spell. If they try to kill Brago with a Swords to Plowshare, you can Ephemerate your Brago. Or if they try to remove one of your combo pieces, you can flicker the combo piece. Let's see. As long as it is a creature, it's got to be a creature. And then it comes back on your next turn, and you get an extra flicker out of it. So I think this is good enough to include. And then the other one that is vying for that same position is best flicker spell that there is, Touch the Spirit Realm. Touch the Spirit Realm is not, when you channel it, that's not a spell. So it's got 2 mana, colorless and a white. You discard it. This cannot be counterspelled. You exile target artifact or creature, and then you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So if there is a stacks piece that's staying in your way, if it's stopping you from winning, you can blank that stacks piece. Or even if it's like a blocker that's stopping you from having an open lane to hit somebody with your Brago, you can blank that thing, remove it from the game just for this turn. And a nice thing about it is if it's something like I don't know, some kind of something that's stopping you, but it's stopping the entire table too. Collector Oof comes to mind. You can turn the Collector Oof off just for your turn, and then you can try to win. And if you get stopped, the Collector Oof comes back into play, so your opponents still do have to deal with that damn thing. So a lot of times that's better than actually removing it outright. Then the other thing Touch the Spirit Realm is, it is an enchantment. And sometimes in this deck especially, you will just use it as such. You'll just play it like an O-ring. When it's a 3-mana, exile 1 target artifact or creature until it leaves the battlefield. So you can just put this on the biggest problem in play and exile that thing. And then when somebody plays something that's more dangerous, that's more problematic for you, then you can go to combat, hit somebody with Brago, flicker it, and when it comes back into play, you can change the target of it. So you'll always have it on the most annoying thing if you use it as an enchantment. I think probably most of the time you're going to use it as a blink effect, but some of the time, and in this deck probably more than in other decks, you may just choose the O-ring mode for it. What else? We've got a pretty good suite of tutors. We've got some cantrips too to just kind of help you get through your deck. Good interaction. Muddle the Mixture is a tutor that can find your Strionic Resonator, or it can find a piece that you need, like Cloud of Fairies. If you need that to get your infinite mana thing rolling, it'll find that. Mostly it's here to find Strionic Resonator, and it's a reasonable piece of interaction when you need it to be. We've got Fabricate, which can find Strionic Resonator or a Lithoform Engine. Reshape, same thing. Solve the Equation, you can tutor chain with it, or you can find, say you've got Archaeomancer in play. You can cast Solve the Equation to find one of your Time Warp spells, like Temporal Manipulation, and then you can start doing that thing. So if I wasn't real clear about that, you cast Temporal Manipulation. Now you get an extra turn after this one, and it is in your graveyard. You go to you've got your Archaeomancer in play. You go to combat, you hit somebody with Brago, and then you flicker the Archaeomancer, which returns the Time Warp to your hand, and then you cast it again, so nobody else gets any other turns. You're just going to beat everybody to death with your 2-power commander. To ensure that we have a good shot at making it into the late game, we're using at least, I think, a couple board wipes. We've got Supreme Verdict, which is just a board wipe that cannot be countered, destroy all creatures. You'll have to be thoughtful about how you use this, but you do have tutors that can find it. Sometimes it'll be reusable. So this is a good thing to have access to in an Azorius kind of control deck. Time Warp is another version. It's a 9-cent version, but it also has some extra synergy with the deck in that, number one, if you do have your commander in play, you can sort of save your commander so you don't have to pay the command tax. It just goes to your hand and you recast it. Because it's return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures. The other thing is you've got all these creatures that have ETBs, and if there's one that you'd like to reuse, then you can cast the Time Warp and bounce that creature to your hand so that you can play it out again. I don't know if I mentioned it, but Welcoming Vampire, if you flicker this, you're resetting it. So even though it says whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card, it says this ability triggers only once each turn. But if you flicker it, then that isn't the case. You can use it again. Keep that in mind. Wall of Omens. So we've gone over kind of a lot of the flickerable creatures. Skyclave Apparition, though, is nasty. This is just a removal piece, and this is better than you might think if you've not played with it. This is not an O-ring. This says when Skyclave Apparition enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with mana value 4 or less. But if you just stop reading there, you'll probably think that when this thing dies, that thing comes back. But it doesn't. Not exactly. When it leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the mana value of the card. So if you hit somebody's whatever, their 3 mana thing, you can exile Skyclave. And then when you go to combat, you hit somebody with Brago, you flicker Skyclave Apparition, and you can change the target to some other thing. And they don't get their thing back. They just get a 3/3 in that case, which we probably don't care very much about. I was talking about tutors. Well, we've got a lot of draw and scry effects that'll help us get to where we're going. But Recruiter of the Guard is also a tutor, and Tribute Mage is a tutor. Now, Tribute Mage can find some of our mana rocks, but it can also find our Strionic Resonator. And if you flicker it every turn, you'll have plenty of targets. And I made sure that we had a good handful of options that were exactly artifacts, that were exactly 2 mana, including ones that make mana, like Mind Stone, but also ones that draw cards. We've got this one also makes a treasure token. So Gold Pan is another way to go infinite mana during combat and then actually have infinite mana on your post-combat, like main phase 2. So you can keep reusing the Tribute Mage, and if you are having a hard time finding a piece, you can actually use your Recruiter of the Guard, double checking, yeah, with toughness 2 or less. Will find almost all this. It'll find your Tribute Mage, which can find your Strionic Resonator. It can find your Witch Enchanter if you're mana locked, because this is a land on the other side. It can find the piece that you need to draw cards or close out the game, right? Speaking of which, how do we actually close out the game? So sometimes we're going to end up in an infinite turns loop, and we're going to literally beat everybody to death with our Brago. That's the thing that'll happen. But the other way, when we're going through this Strionic Resonator loop, I mean, sure, with like Born, when you cast Born and you have infinite mana, you can just cast your Time Warp and then go to your next turn and hit somebody again and cast your... you've got infinite mana, you've got your deck, or as many cards as you'd like. Cast your Invasion, get the Time Warp, cast the Time Warp during combat with your Born, and then you're going to get another turn where you're going to have the same setup, so you'll just keep beating people to death. But there's a real clean, and it's a lot easier to explain way with a certain artifact. And probably some of you are thinking about the Altar of the Brood already. And if you're thinking that, you're wrong. Codex Shredder, I think, is just a much better piece. I don't know why we would play Altar. Doesn't make sense to me. Altar of the Brood is basically a dead card outside of the combo. I mean, it might even be worse than a dead card. Like when you're flickering Altar of the Brood, you're milling people. But I think in high-powered and definitely in cEdh decks, most people would like to be milled. Most people would be happy to put the top 13 cards of their deck into their graveyard at the beginning of every game. So we don't want to do that. Codex Shredder, not only is it not a dead card until the combo turn, it does the same exact thing on the combo turn. When you're comboing off with Strionic Resonator and you can flicker Codex Shredder over and over and over, that's all you need. I mean, if you just have Soul Ring, Strionic Resonator, or Basalt Monolith, Strionic Resonator, or even, what's the thing called? Cloud of Fairies, Strionic Resonator. If you've got 2 mana's worth of rocks and Strionic Resonator with a Codex Shredder, and you go to combat, you're presenting a win right there. Because every time this thing comes back into play, you tap it to mill a player. You can just do that over and over and over, and you just mill everyone out, and then you pass the turn, and they try to draw from an empty library, and they all lose. But the advantage that we have with Codex Shredder, aside from it not just, well... The big advantage, the reason other than it being 20 cents, which doesn't hurt, but it has this actual useful ability. Pay 5 mana, tap and sacrifice Codex Shredder to return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's pretty good. That's like a lot better than the altar. So if your Strionic Resonator gets destroyed, you still have the lithiform engine, but it's harder to find. You're gonna have your codec shredder. You'll have access to, if you have your codec shredder, and your Strionic Resonator is in the graveyard, you can put the codec. You can use the codec shredder to put the Strionic Resonator right back into your hand and get back into the game and start trying to close it out. So that, I think, is a pretty detailed. Yeah, I think that's the deck. Now you know. If you didn't know, now you know. Let's talk about Plagon. So I do think I want to build this guy, but I don't know. I think probably Brago is better. But think about just kind of an average situation. Like, how unreasonable is it going to be? Like, how unlikely is it going to be for us to have any one of these Archaeomancer or Peregrine Drake or Metamorph having cloned something with big power? I'm sorry, toughness. The Plagon itself, Welcoming Vampire, Wall of Omens. We've got some dudes that have more toughness than... So what if we have just one? We've got Wall of Omens, we've got Brago, and then we cast our Plagon. Well, for 3 mana, we draw 3 cards. That's a pretty good rate, right? And then we go to combat with our Brago, and we hit somebody, even without having any kind of combo stuff going on. When we hit somebody with Brago and flicker Plagon, we're going to draw 3 cards, 3 extra cards every turn with just that tiny little bit of synergy. And even if you just have this, like drawing 2 extra cards every turn, this is just, you're going to be just swimming in value with this deck. I think it's real. In fact, I've got a buddy who plays a version of it, but I think I'm going to try to see if I can't persuade him to play this version of it. Yeah, I think this is a good version. I think this is the way to build the deck at $100. I wanted to mention too, we do have ways to ensure that if we have to use one of our board wipes, it doesn't totally cripple us. So that can be a problem with decks like this, is you can be pretty well established, but your opponents are also pretty well established, and you feel like you need to board wipe, but then when you do board wipe, you're kind of like starting over yourself. And a lot of times, especially in a faster meta, that's going to mean turn 4 board wipe, and now all of your opponents are going to get to untap and start redeveloping before you. So we're not playing just creatures as our important effects. We've got a pretty good mix of artifacts and enchantments as well. So if we've got Reality Acid and a couple of rocks with an Ichor Wellspring in play, when we wipe the board, we're not starting from scratch. We do need to get our Brago back out and going, but we're not having to set up all over again. I think that's it, guys. Wow, that went longer than I thought. I thought I was cruising through this video. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the video and learned something about Brago. I might actually do some hands. I might go through some hands with this one. I like this one. Definitely my kind of stuff here. Until next time, may all your outs be live and your women be liver. East side until the day that you die. West side until the day that I die. Maybe we can meet in the middle, mid side until the day that we die. Word to your brothers. And namaste, nerds.